PowerPoint setup and everything. Today I'd like to talk about contained availability groups. This is a new feature that was introduced in SQL Server 2022. So I'm trying to, why didn't that switch? Okay, sorry, I think I had multiple versions of the PowerPoint open, so it was confusing me. 1 second. Try it again. Hey, finally, sorry. Yeah, so this is a new feature that was introduced in SQL Server. Well, I'll first go through the topics I'm going to discuss today. First, I'll just review the traditional AG group architecture for availability groups and discuss some of the challenges that we have with managing instance level objects in an availability group environment. Talk a little bit about contained databases, just because there's a little bit of overlap in some of the things you can do with contained databases compared to contained availability groups. And I'll talk about the actual contained availability groups and how it helps improve manageability along with the architecture that it has. As I mentioned, this is a new feature that was introduced in SQL Server 2022. It requires Enterprise Edition, so just be aware of that one. It can be used on either bare metal servers or VMs, including Azure SQL VMs, or really any cloud VM, where as long as they're they can support the networking constructs and everything that's needed for availability groups. It's something that's not available yet with Azure MI, and I know some of the folks use those. But in the cloud, you have other options which provide availability, like specifically failover groups, for instead of availability groups in the case of Azure SQL Database and Managed Instance. It doesn't have the benefits of managing the instance level stuff though. So in a traditional availability group, just to review, is anybody using availability groups today here in the room? Or so we have a couple. Yeah, it's really a pretty cool feature. It's alternative to the traditional failover clustering to provide high availability. And the added benefit is it also provides DR type capabilities too. So with availability groups, the idea is that each node of the availability group doesn't have to share any sort of resources in terms of storage, memory or anything. They're basically independent and fully contained on themselves. However, within that, the databases that are part of an availability group can be replicated to the the other nodes of the availability group, in near real time or in real time when it comes to the synchronous hardening of changes to the availability group. So anytime you make a change, anytime you connect to the listener of an availability group, you always point to the primary node of the availability group, and that's the read-write replica of the set of databases that are part of the availability group. And anytime you make a change, it's automatically applied and hardened through to the any secondary synchronous replicas, and you can have multiple synchronous replicas as well to provide high availability and extra protection against any sort of possible data loss and all. Optionally, you can have asynchronous replicas, which are typically going to be in a remote data center or something for DR, in a different region. And the reason that you have the choice between asynchronous and synchronous is just with the synchronous replica, you have to wait for the commit to harden on both the synchronous secondary as well as the primary. And that latency can be, it depends on the distance, physical distance between your servers, but within the same data center, it's typically going to be, pretty small, but it does have to wait. So maybe, let's say a millisecond or so. But for a remote data center, you're going to be, subject to the speed of light, and light only travels so fast. So you're talking about typically, oftentimes, double-digit type milliseconds, depending on the distance of the server. So that can be prohibitive for a high volume, OLTP type workload. So for that reason, for a remote data center that's only going to be used for DR, and there's some acceptable data loss, then, we can, eliminate the need to have to wait for each of those commits to occur. It just pretty much applies those, as it can. And there is a risk of data loss if you were to lose your primary data center or your nodes and have to switch to the asynchronous replica for DR. There is some possible data loss there. But this presentation, I'm mainly going to cover about the manageability aspects of, the availability groups. So again, the clients always connect to the listener of the availability group, which is really just an abstraction layer over whatever the primary node happens to be at the time. By connecting to the listener, there's, location independence of where the actual availability group databases reside. And there's also some additional benefits there, such as like if you want to do a SQL Server upgrade, you can do a side-by-side upgrade, to the new SQL Server version. And then when it's time to switch over, you can just drop and recreate the listener to point to the new availability group of the new version database, and no client connection string changes are needed or anything. So it helps improve the manageability of in that kind of a scenario as well. But the main benefit is just the location abstraction of the availability groups themselves. Optionally, you can get fancy with read-only replicas, so that all the read writes always occur on the primary node in the availability group, but you can optionally turn on the secondary nodes for read-only access. So clients that only need to read data and don't need to write to it, they can specify read-only intent in the connection string, and they'll automatically be redirected to a secondary read-only replica, so that the read-only replica, doesn't interfere with any of the writes or whatever. And all the activity against the read-only replica occurs in snapshot isolation. So, you won't end up with any, writers blocking readers and readers blocking writers on the primary node, as much. So that's really the traditional availability group, overview. Again, the main aspect or the main concern there is that, all the writes occur on the primary node. But notice that every node is really an independent SQL Server installation, an independent instance. So each node has its own copy of the system databases, master and MSDB. Master, of course, is where all the logins are stored, as well as the other server level objects like server level roles and members and credentials, server level objects. Similarly, with MSDB, that's an instance level system database that stores all the SQL Server jobs and SQL Server Agent proxy accounts and those sorts of things. And those system databases are shared between among all the databases on the instance, including the databases that are in the availability groups, because you can have multiple availability groups on a given instance, and you can have multiple databases that technically aren't even in an availability group, and it'll let you access those databases when you connect to either through a listener or directly to the host. But the downside of that is that you have to keep all the system databases in sync manually among all of the availability group nodes. So if I create a login in this example, I would have to create the login on node 1, 2, and 3, make sure that the SIDs are identical, because that's ultimately how what maps the users to databases is the actual SID rather than the name itself. And it's just a lot of tedious effort to do a lot of that. So, some of the issues that you have, like I mentioned, you have to, create it on every AG node manually. You have to, for SQL logins, which, can have a different SID on each node, you have to take care to make sure that the SIDs are identical. So you have to use the syntax that allows you to specify the SID, meaning that you have to script out the SID on the, excuse me, you have to script out the SID on the source login or source node where you created the login, and use that to create the login on all the other nodes. You have to manually, manage all the jobs. So anytime you make a change to a job, you have to apply that same change to every node in the availability group, and it just becomes fairly tedious. And a lot of times you're going to want to have a job that only runs on the primary node. So what you have to do then is put some code in your jobs to detect whether or not it's running on the primary or secondary. And if it's running on a secondary, just short circuit it and don't bother doing the job. So a lot of times you'll set the first step just to check if it's primary or not. And then if it is the secondary node, just quit the job with success. So even though the jobs are technically running on every node, they only do work when they're actually running on the primary. Does anybody have any questions so far? Not yet, that's good. So I'll talk a little bit about contained databases. This isn't really the core topic of the presentation, but I wanted to include that here because contained databases also have some benefits for manageability, but they should not be contained with contained availability groups. It's really a separate thing that can be used separately or in addition to contained availability groups. Contained availability groups essentially users authenticate at the database level instead of the instance level. So you actually define your user account in the database, and users can connect directly to that database with that database name in the connection string. And if it's a contained database where you specify containment equal partial, then the user is authenticated by the database itself rather than the master database where your logins would normally be. So by doing that, the databases become much more portable because you can create a contained database that has all the users in it that you need that need access to that database, and just do a backup restore to any instance essentially, and it has everything it needs. You don't have to worry about syncing logins or anything. And if you have that contained database as part of an availability group, that contained database is replicated to all the other nodes just like any other database in the availability group. So it automatically essentially syncs all those users. So if you create a user on the primary database, contained database, it automatically gets replicated to all the secondaries as well without having to do anything fancy. It's just kind of automagic. So it does provide some benefits there. Ideally, they're most useful if you really just have a use case where you have an application that only needs access to a single database. It doesn't work very well when you have an application that does cross database access and accesses other things on the instance, because then that application and the database aren't fully contained because you have a dependency on other things inside of the instance. So typically you would try to, you don't get a whole lot of benefit with contained, availability groups in that kind of a scenario. So, another gotcha is that if you authenticate at the database level with a contained database, that user context that that has been established is not trusted at all by any of the other databases on the server by default. So if I authenticate to a contained database because I have that contained database and connection string, I can access that database without any problem. But if I need to do a cross database query, or if I need to do a use statement for another database, nobody's going to trust that contained database unless you specifically mark it as trustworthy. And you would also need to have an identical account with the same SID in each database. And that SID issue only applies to SQL logins. With Windows logins, the SID is maintained in Active Directory, and that's really where the master copy is. So you don't have to worry about syncing SIDs for Windows users and groups. The downside of the contained database too, though, is for instance level objects like jobs, credentials, those sorts of things. It doesn't have anything included to help address that that issue with keeping those in sync. So I'll do a quick demo of the contained databases. Let's see, make sure I got. I have to, I guess I have to quit my presentation for that. Hold on. All right. I'm kind of struggling with my PowerPoint here. Give me 1 second. I think I still have 2 instances of this darn thing open is my problem. Okay. Let's close that. Go back. All right. So on my demo laptop here, I have basically 4 machines. One is a domain controller, and then I have 2 SQL Server machines running, you know, with the availability groups ready to be configured. So this is going to be a little bit awkward because I really need to extend this darn thing. It's going to be tricky. There we go. All right, I'm just grabbing the script that I need to run here, and like I said, it's a little bit awkward the way I have the screens, you know, set up here. So let's see. So I'll connect to I'm just going to do this as instead of an availability group, I'm just going to, for the contained database, I'm just going to use this as if it's a standalone instance. All right, so to use contained databases, first you have to make sure the instance is configured for contained database authentication. And I've already run the script, but it doesn't hurt to run it again. So in this case here, I'll just connect to both those nodes and make sure that it's, you know, that it's set. So that'll allow me to create databases with that is contained. So I'm always particular when it comes to database ownership. So I always, you know, I follow this practice at work too. I try to create an account for the as the database owner and use that instead of using my own account, because when you create a database, that by default is created by the account of whoever creates it, that the database is owned by that account. And if, as long as whoever created the databases never leaves the company or anything, I guess you'd be okay. But a lot of times people, you know, like me, like to make sure that the database is owned by an account that is specifically created for the purpose of database ownership. So to that end, went ahead and I'm just going to go ahead and create one here. By the way, I'm running all these scripts in SQL command mode because I'm switching between instances all the time, so it makes it a little bit easier. So, you know, because I have to make sure the SIDs are the same, I scripted out the SID of the new account I just created, you know, as a, you know, a create login script. And I'm going to use that same, you know, create login to create the account on the other node. That way, the SID of the account will be the same on both nodes. In this database owner account, it doesn't even need connect permissions, so it has absolutely no permissions whatsoever. Let's see, I guess I didn't. Well, I did highlight the connect. Okay, yeah. I accidentally ran it on the current instance, so I got an error because that SID was already in use. So then I'll just create a few databases. The main one I'm going to focus on here is just that one that's called contain, but I have a couple other for, you know, just to show you how the cross database access works here. So I'll go ahead and create those databases. Oh, I highlighted my comment. What I got here. Okay, so I created 3 databases. 2 of them are contained and one of them is not contained, you know, just to illustrate it. So here I'm going to create both a Windows user and a SQL user on what's called both nodes here. I said SQL user. Technically, this is a Windows group of which the SQL users are members of. And similarly, I'll copy this thing here. My clipboard for later use here. I'll go ahead and add that same Windows group to the non-contained database. All right. So to test the Windows access, I'm just going to use a run as command, which allows me to run the process under different Windows credentials. So I'll just do this from a command prompt just to make it easy. Let's see, that's SQL user 1. Okay. So this opened up a command prompt under that other Windows security context instead of me. So this is now running as that regular old non-privileged SQL user. So if I just run a SQL command, just connect directly to the contained database, and just do. Oops. Sorry, I'm having trouble aiming my mouse here. I didn't realize it was going to be so sensitive, but it is. So all I'm doing is doing a query to select from sys databases. And when I connect to the contained database and I query all the databases, all I see is master, tempdb, and the contained database. I don't see any of the other databases on the instance. Like in Management Studio, when I'm connected normally to the instance, if I look at the dropdown, I have all these other databases, SSISDB, test contain, the other two that I created. But when I'm connected to the contain database, I don't see all of those. It's the idea is that you're only, the database is, only allows things that would normally be accessed to be visible. So similarly, if I, connect to the, well, actually, if I just run the query against sys databases, here, exactly the same thing. Where, when I'm connected to, the contain database. However, if I try to access a database that does not have the account, like in this case here, it's, let's see, is that test contain one? Oh, this is the non-contained database, I'm sorry. Even though this, and keep in mind, I did not create a login for this account. It really, all I did is create the users in the contained databases. So if I try to access another database from this account, oh, did I copy the wrong one? Yeah. There we go. I'm gonna try to move this up a little bit so it's a little more visible here. I think I'm okay right now. Thanks for asking, though. Yeah, so I got an error that says that the login failed, and it's because there is no login, for that account, and I'm trying to connect to a non-contained database, so it doesn't trust the, security context. But if I just, go ahead and just create the, or change the database to trustworthy, now when I connect to the contained database, it should trust the fact that I authenticated the database level and allow access to the other database. Or did it? Oops. Let's see. Did run it, didn't I? I can't see what's wrong here. I'm going to skip over that just because of interest of time. I didn't mean to spend so much time on contained databases anyway. Just FYI, this is a new presentation, so I hadn't had time to go through the timings of it in front of a real audience. So I'm going to try to wing it a little bit and just maybe just cut this one short and go to the the meat of the topic, which is really the contained availability group. So so what should happen, and always did when I was testing before, if I try to, once I mark that trustworthy and it trusts the contained database context, then I can go ahead and, connect to those other databases and stuff. So I'm just going to go ahead and drop all that stuff I just created here. Try to. Okay, well, I dropped it. Good. So any questions about contained databases? All right, so I'll go back on to the, whoops. So going on to contained databases, I'm sorry, contained availability groups. So every contained availability group, like I showed on that, oh, I didn't show it, never mind, I haven't got there yet, has an availability scope version of master and MSDB databases. So when you create a contained availability group, SQL Server creates 2 additional databases besides your user databases and availability group, which are named after the AG name dash master and the AG name dash MSDB. And those are system databases that you can only see when you connect to the availability group listener for a contained availability group. Otherwise, they look like their regular user databases. If you connect to the instance, you'll see those databases, but you won't. They can't be used like master and MSDB in the sense that you can't see the, the jobs in Object Explorer with SQL Server Agent or anything like that outside of the contained availability group. They're initially created as empty databases. Master will have only the sysadmin role members when you create it, and the MSDB will have nothing. It won't have any jobs or anything. So it just creates empty templates essentially. And the only reason that it creates the sysadmin role members and the availability group master databases so that you can then a sysadmin role member can connect to the availability group and provision other users. Otherwise, you'd end up locking yourself out. Just like if you install SQL Server without provisioning a user, an admin user. When you connect to the availability group listener, SQL Server creates an execution context that's specific for that availability group. And like contained databases, you can only see the databases that are part of that contained availability group. And furthermore, when you look at the system databases, you'll see a master and MSDB database without that AG name prefix that looks like a regular master and MSDB database, and it is. It is it's a fully functional one, but it can only be used in the context of the availability group connection. Any changes that you make to the master or MSDB databases when you're connected to that listener, connection are automatically replicated by, the normal availability group replication to all of the other replica. So that means that if I create a login in the master database when I'm connected to the listener, the change is applied to the primary replica and then automatically synchronized to the secondaries just through the regular, AG synchronization. They're automatically synchronized, without you having to do anything special. So that means when I create a login, it's created everywhere. I create a job, it's created everywhere within the contained availability group. You don't need to have any additional code in your jobs to, short circuit if you're running on the primary node or on the secondary node, I should say, because SQL Server Agent is, running on each node, but it's only going to run the jobs for the availability group on the primary node. I mentioned earlier that the AG scope master is initially empty when you create the availability group, except for the admin role members. So then the DBA task is to connect to the the listener and then create any other database objects that you need within the contained availability group. So if you have an application that needs to have a couple of databases plus a couple of jobs, you would of course create those jobs, and as along with any security principles that are needed to access those databases. And same thing with any, all the jobs and stuff, and, So if you're creating a brand new application, then of course you're not going to have anything to start with, and you would just create them normal. But if you're migrating an existing application to a contained AG, you would need to, script those out and then run those scripts on the against the contained availability group listener to create those in the in the database. So this is the similar diagram that I had earlier, except that it shows the availability scope system databases. So the normal master MSDB databases at the instance level still exist, but they're not really used when you connect to the availability group scope listener with the contained database. The contained database will point you basically to the primary node, But immediately after connecting, if you query, master or MSDB, you're only going to see objects that are in the availability group scoped, system database. So if you say, for example, select star from sys databases, you're going to see master and model, but they're actually going to be pointing to the master and model that are in the availability group contained, contained availability group. You can still access other databases outside of the availability group, just like you can with a normal availability group, but it's the best practice generally not to do so, because then you have an external dependency, so that if you fail this availability group over to another node, the application isn't going to work unless those other databases also exist on the other node, and they're or if they're in a different availability group, that availability group would have to be failed over as well. So usually you're going to try to plan as such to have all of the databases that a given application needs as part of the same availability group. There's a lot of different ways to mix and match availability groups, contain databases, and it all depends on your environment, how you're planning to use them. But there's a lot of flexibility there. But I just want to mention that best practice is to try to keep inside of an availability group if you can. Like on my database, for example, I have this lab thing. I have a DBA database that I use for Ola Hollengren scripts and all that to support those. Those are independent on each node, and they're not part of an availability group, but I still need them for the infrastructure to do the regular backup, restores, and tasks. But let me jump over to the main demo for availability groups, because that's really where the meat of this is here. So let me get my script.
I have a question.
Yeah, question.
You just said that you have a kind of a database group. Do you have that on each instance, or only on the normal primary instance, or how do you have that set up outside the availability?
Yeah, so the question is, how do I handle how do I set up that DBA database, for that I was talking about? Yeah. For this lab I have, that DBA database is not part of an availability group. It's essentially an independent database on every node in both nodes. So that way, if one crashes, whatever, they're really just used for at least the way I'm using it. It's really just for utility scripts and to support some of the the backup, restore stuff, monitoring, those kind of things. So it isn't to say that you couldn't do something similar with a DBA database in an availability group, but then if you have multiple availability groups on your infrastructure, the question is which one is the primary. It's all that kind of stuff. And if you're and usually when it comes to monitoring and that kind of stuff, the intent is to run it on a specific server or a specific node of the availability group. So you could have like the primary replica for one availability group be on one node and the primary on a different node for a different availability group. And if I have scripts in that database I want to run, I would have to do it that way.
Thank you.
All right, so let me get connected to a different machine this time. Let's see. Sorry, I lost my mouse. There it is. All right. Yeah, I didn't mean to go full screen on that thing. All right, so this is the DDL script that I use to create a contained availability group. I've already run this, and this is just the preparation like I have to do for any instance that's going to host an availability group. You have to create endpoints for the mirroring endpoint, for essentially to replicate the changes across the different nodes of the availability group. So I've already done all that, so I'm not going to bother, demoing that. And I created the SQL Server servers account, grant permission, all that stuff. And just like on the other demo where I created a login specifically for database ownership, I'm going to go ahead and do that on this one too. And I'm going to copy that script best I can here. Hopefully I did that right. And make sure that I this mouse is a lot more sensitive than I thought it would be. Okay, that's a different one. I already had that in there. Okay. All right. Because I'm going to be using both the nodes as part of this demo, so I have to make sure that anytime I create, something on one node, I have to create it on the other. So do that to make sure. So now I have the database owner login with the same SID on both of those guys. So I'm just going to create a few databases that are going to be part of this availability group. I'm just going to call them test 1, test 2, and a contained database just to be interesting, but I'm not really going to be using it as part of the demo. And so now that I've created the databases, I'm going to go ahead and back them up because I'm going to be using that to seed the databases manually on the other nodes of the availability group. Instead of doing the automatic seeding like normal, like a lot of times you'll see for smaller databases. My personal preference is to use manual seeding just because I feel I have more control, but whatever floats your boat. Plus, the manual works better if you have a lot of databases. So let me go through the DDL that's needed to create a contained availability group. I'm more of a T-SQL guy. I prefer to use scripts so that it's more repeatable and I can do the same thing over and over. Some DBAs prefer the SSMF GUI because it does have some additional checks and validations that you're not going to get in T-SQL unless you write it yourself. So but this allows me to speak to some of the the availability group stuff in more detail, and also, like I said, it's fully repeatable this way. And this is all part of general traditional availability groups, so I'm not going to go into a whole discuss these in any particular detail. The only difference actually between creating a contained availability group and a traditional availability group, or either basic, distributed, or availability group, is this contained. So normally you would just create your availability group with one of these other options, but in this case here I'm doing contained, and this when I specify contained, that's where I get the additional the additional system databases that are part of the availability group. And I just list the 3 databases that I want to create this on. And in this demo here, I just have two nodes, both are synchronous. So I just have, essentially two synchronous nodes that are part of the AG. I don't have that async one. I would have done the async one, but I was afraid I was going to run low on memory on my laptop, and I didn't want to, so I just, and I also have the secondary configured with as a read-only one as part of the demo, but I'm not going to be, demoing read-only access, but it's possible to do it. Here I said seating automatic, even though I'm doing it manually. I should have put manual on there. Let's see anything else. I think that's pretty much it. So I'm just going to go ahead and run this. And again, because I specified contain, this is going to contain this is going to create a contained availability group. Okay. That's good. All right. So the availability group is, just been created. So I haven't done anything but just to create the availability group on, node 1 here. So I'm just going to run the query just to select the, darn it. A little bit more. Yeah. So I'm just going to query sys databases and, join it or left join it to the server principals just to show the database owner stuff here real quick. So this is showing me all the databases on my server, at least on node 1. I wish the mouse wasn't so sensitive here. I'm just having trouble grabbing it here. There we go. So everything looks good here in the sense that I see that I have a valid database owner for all 3 of the databases that I created, test 1, test 2, and test contain. The other databases, I have different owners just because they do on my test box here. So now I'm going to connect to the contained AG listener and run the exact same query, or not exact same, but I have an additional column just to show whether or not I'm connected to the contained database listener or not. So when I run this one inside of the contained database, and again, remember that this is going to be using the master database that's part of the contained availability group. In this case, I see that master and tempDB are owned by SA like they always are, but my user database don't have a valid owner. It has the SID, of the owner that it grabbed from the instance where I created the availability group, but it doesn't have the database owner account in it. So essentially I have an orphaned database owner at this point. So to, go ahead and fix that, what I'll do is just create the, connect to the main instance. In other words, the instance without the availability, I'm sorry, the host directly, just to script out the login, for the availability group. There we go. So I just script out the login with the same SID, and then I'm going to go ahead and just run this in the when connected to the availability group listener, for the contained database. That didn't look right. Did I not paste it right? Sure, let me see. It looks like it just keeps that highlighted. That's why I was confused. Okay. All right, so now that that login exists inside of the contained database listener, I'll connect to the contained database listener again, run the same query, and we should see a nice happy database owner this time around. And we do. We see that the thing. So that's just a detail that I can see that's easy to overlook, that I didn't see documented anywhere in any of the stuff that I looked at. So, you know, just be advised of that. All right, so I'll go ahead and, you know, go through the remainder of the task to set up the secondary nodes here. Make sure I didn't do that right, was I? Already exists. Did I not highlight that first line? Yeah. I keep missing because I don't get good IntelliSense here. I'm running all this stuff in SQL command mode, so I miss things here. You know, so now remember I create those backups to see the databases, so I'll just go ahead and restore both the you know, I'll restore those databases, you know, with no recovery, which is required, you know, to seed those. So I'll go ahead and do that real quick. Do a log backup, you know, because I need to do that. Minute, connect to the second node and restore those. Did I miss restoring the other one? I think I missed running my restore. Try this again. And I'll just do this again, it won't hurt. At least I don't think it'll hurt. Yes, it does hurt, darn it. I have to redo that. All right, let's do another backup, and sorry about that, I didn't run things in the right order. All right, so I'll start again, another full backup. Join the AG. Store. Oh man, what did I do?
It's too early to apply.
Yeah. I thought that of course I did practice these scripts over and over, and then I did also run that with the AG2, right? Yeah. Crap. That's gonna mess up my demo pretty good. Let me just I know this stuff works when I do it start to finish. Let me just go ahead and tear it down and redo some of it real quick. As I like to always, you know, have a script to tear everything down. This might have a few errors when I get to node 2 because that wasn't fully created yet. But so this will blow everything away from node 1. Do the same thing on node 2. And let's go and try that again. All right. How are we doing for time here? Yeah, I think we're doing okay. All right, so this one here. Okay, so I got all the databases recreated. Create the full backup again. Create the contain database listener. All right, not going to bother with showing the orphan stuff and logins. We already did that. But I still need to copy that database owner to the other one. All right, now I have the database owner on node 2. Don't bother showing them. Now we'll join the AG. All right, a little bit happier this time around. And last but not least, go ahead and add those secondary replicas. They're all seated, ready to rock and roll. All right. So here I'm just going to connect to the secondary replica, which is a read-only replica, the way I have it configured, and just run that same query to check the, or just to see what we have here. Okay, so on the secondary node, we see all the same system database they have there. But interestingly, I still have now the databases that I restored are still owned by my ID because I haven't changed the owner yet. Because I just seeded it manually. So I have to, go through the additional step of, on the secondary node and any other nodes where I, restore that database on. And what I do wrong. Oh yeah, I almost forgot. Yeah, I forgot my note here. It fails because it's read-only. So to actually make the change, I have to fail over the availability group from node 1 to node 2 so that the problem, databases are writable. So it's pretty straightforward to do it, just to do a regular failover. I didn't bother checking to make sure everything was synchronized because I trusted. I've done this before and I'm running a little bit short on time, but I did, if I looked at the availability group dashboard, we'd see that everything's synchronized and happy. So I gotta refresh this guy. Yeah, so everything is, right now I just failed over, so the primary instance is node 2, but everything is, just trust me, everything's synchronized. So now, that I failed over, I can go ahead and just, change the database owner and we should be good. Come on, here we go. connect to the instance on node 2, do all that, make sure, okay, all of our database owners are owned by the intended login instead of me, which is good. So I'll go ahead and fail back, for the rest of the demo. Yes. Yes. The question was, can you include SSIS-DB in an availability group? And the answer is yes. As a matter of fact, I actually did as part of the, I'm not going to do that as part of the demo, but I did as part of the lab. I created an availability group just for the SSIS catalog, which of course can be failed over independently of the other user AG groups that I have on this instance here. If I had a situation where I always wanted to make sure that the SSIS catalog was failed over at the same time as the user databases, I could of course have that in the same availability group, and that's probably how would you want to do it. But every situation is a little bit different, especially when it comes to the way you set up SSIS. All right. So now I'm just going to go ahead and create, create a SQL login inside of the contained availability. So I connected the contained availability group listener, and I create a SQL login. And by the way, I don't remember if I mentioned this, but one of the system databases that you may have noticed that's missing is the model database. So what I've been doing is I kind of use the absence of the model database when I connect to indicate that I am running in a contained availability group execution context. So that's really what that subquery here does for the, let me get this off of here. So I just check to see whether or not that model database exists, and if it doesn't, then I know I'm running in the contained availability group, which is a little bit of a way to back into it. There's probably some other functions or ways to do it, but I kind of found that an easy way as I was preparing. So now if I connect to the availability group, and you see my secret password right here, as that same login that I just created, this should, of course, just, more or less work. Yeah. So I'm able to use the test1 database. Yeah. Same thing with test2. Yeah. So for test2, I did not create that that login. So that, of course, fails because it's that login does not exist in the database or the as a database user, or as a login inside of the contained database master. Yeah. So that's a DBA database, which is a database outside of the availability group. If I try to connect to that one, I get the exact same, error that there's no server principal, no login for that one. So now I'm going to cheat. This is kind of interesting. So I'm going to connect to the availability group listener again, and I'm just going to add that account to the sysadmin user role just to illustrate, how some of this execution context works, within the contained availability group. So now that SQL login, that's only a login in the contained availability group, is a sysadmin role member only in the contained availability group. So now if I run the same the same use statements for the databases that failed previously, if I run those now, they succeed because sysadmin role members, permissions are not checked, so they have, godlike permissions over the, over the stuff inside of the contained availability group. And similarly, for any other logins that you create, you just have to be, they'll automatically, and mind you, this is all replicated on the other instance too. So if I connect to, I didn't script this, but I'm sure if I connect to, whoops, I have 2HE1. I'll have to fail over to do that, I guess. Yeah. I guess I can. Not a minute. Okay, there's my fail back to node 2. Let's go ahead. Okay, so I'll fail over to node 2 just to make it interesting. And now, if I'm connected to this should come back with node 2, and it does, and I have all that same sysadmin permission on here because that automatically got replicated. I didn't have to script out that user and apply it to the other nodes and all. All right, any questions? I know there's a bit to cover and talk about. It's a little bit different than you may be accustomed to. I've been using SQL Server for a long time, and I got used to the master and MSDB being at the instance level, and now that there's another copy at the AG contained level, and what benefits that has, I'm still getting my head around it. I haven't used it in production yet.
What benefits would it have besides the migration? Like, what are some benefits of using the contained beyond a migration? If that makes sense.
So the question is, what are the advantages of using contained availability group outside of migrations? Well, it's the main advantage, as I see it at least, is the elimination of the need to synchronize, the server level objects. So, you don't have to, especially if you have a large estate of SQL servers, when you have to manage these things, you have to know all of the individual server names, aka nodes, that the availability group's part of, so that you can run your scripts against each of those nodes. And it can get quite complex if you have a large estate of SQL servers, and you start to mix and match. Hey, these two nodes serve these two availability groups, and they're secondary for one and primary for another. And you can really things can get pretty complicated out there in the wild, I guess is what I should say. It just kind of depends how you use availability groups today. But just the need not to have to synchronize the jobs, the logins, and your certificates and credentials and those sorts of things, in my opinion, is just a godsend, in terms of, but of course, if you've already developed a lot of automation and tooling around that, you won't necessarily see as much of an advantage right out of the box. But if you start using the contained availability groups instead of that, you'll find your scripts are going to be a lot simpler, more straightforward, in my opinion, and those sorts of things.
You said security as well, so that if you connect to the contained availability group, you can't see other databases on the node.
Yeah, so regarding another advantage, so the question was about security, that you can't see the other databases on the node. It's a little bit of security through obscurity, because even though you can't see them, when you select from sys databases or in the SSMS dropdown, they'll still be accessible if you happen to have a login that has that same name at the instance level. So you have to and the best practice, at least that what I've read so far, is that you may not want to have the same principles at the the instance level as you do within the same contained availability group. So I guess another way to put it is that maybe you should just go all in on the availability groups and don't put anything, any user, logins and stuff inside of the instance masters would be one way to address it. Because a lot of times you want to use availability groups as some sort of boundary, but they're not real. And just like a contained database, they're not really intended to be used as a security boundary, just as a way to, simplify some of the administration aspects of, the logins and users and stuff. That answer your question? Or yeah, thanks for bringing that up. I should have probably mentioned that too. All right, let me go back to the PowerPoint here and we'll wrap up. All right, well, wrap up is about it. My next slide was really just for questions. So, are there any? Does anybody have any additional questions about contained availability groups? There's a lot to really kind of cover there, and sorry with the technical issues with the demos and stuff. I wasn't, this demo is a little bit more complicated than I usually do because I have all these VMs and stuff, and sharing the screens is a little bit awkward with PowerPoint as well. And I didn't have a chance to rehearse it. This is a new demo that I would have. I probably would have forgot about it if Julie didn't send out the meeting invite. I had to finish it up. I forgot to, so I didn't have time to rehearse it is really what I'm getting at. So my apologies for that. I did also include a slide with some of the resources. Whoops, didn't change slide here. Boy, this is just not my day when it comes to PowerPoint. Yeah, and what's called tomorrow I'm going to upload the presentation with all the scripts that I demoed, just like I did last time. And I have there's a top link on the slide. I haven't put it out there yet, but I'll have the PowerPoint as well as the the demo scripts in that zip file. And I also included some links to some of the other some of the documentation for both the contained availability groups and contained databases, along with some security considerations for contained databases too. There's a lot to assimilate when it comes to a lot of the security aspects of it, because there's so many different ways to do things, and some of them have more merit than others, and depending on your particular environment, you may have find some practices more. You have to be more careful than others when it comes to cross database access and setting up your accounts and all that. If you have cases where your server's dedicated for a specific application, only sysadmin role members can create objects, and applications just use those databases based on the permission you give them. Things are a lot more straightforward. It's when you get into the environments where you have some maybe developers who can create objects in databases and and not others, and it gets difficult to lock some of that stuff down sometimes unless you're careful. So contained availability groups is one way, at least, to help isolate some of the security aspects of it with their own master and model database, or master and MSDB databases. All right,
So,
that's all I really have today. Question though, closing it
Dan,
up.
can you go over again just the basics of so you've got the contained database, you're not creating a login in the master on the nodes, you're creating just a user within the container?
Correct. So with the so if I just created a brand new availability group that doesn't have any logins or any security or anything in it yet, what I would need to do is connect to the availability group listener, and that would point me to the availability group, like HE1, for example, on this slide here, and it would actually be you creating that login inside of the availability group scope master database. It would not create the login up at the instance level up here. So the only way that that login would have access to databases is by connecting to the AG contained AG listener.
So you connect to the listener and create the login. So the login is created in the contained AG,
Exactly.
and you grant it whatever permissions it needs on the different databases. But you have to, in the demo, you went to the different nodes to create the users.
In the demo, I should have really called that out. It probably introduced more confusion than it really is. But for the database owner account, because you cannot create just calling out the absence of the model database. What that really means is I cannot connect to the availability group listener of the contained availability group and create a database because there's no model database, which is the template for all new databases. So I always have to create the database at the instance level before adding it or joining it to the availability group. So the only security principle I care about really is the owner, because the owner is going to be recorded in the instance level master database has a record of all the databases on the instance, regardless of whether or not there's a contained availability group database, a regular availability group database, or any other database that's not part of an AG. It needs to know about all the databases on the instance. So when I create that database, the database owner is going to be me because it's always the security principal that created it. So if I want to have a specialized owner, as I mentioned, is the best practice, I have to alter the authorization on that database at the instance level, and everything is good. However, when I add that same database to the availability group, the only accounts in the master database are going to be sysadmin role members. And because my database owner is not a sysadmin role member, is not going to be there. So essentially I have an orphaned database owner login at that point. So that's why I had to script out the login from the instance, that DB owner login, and then run that same script against the, after connecting to the AG scoped listener. And then that way it created that same account with the same SID just for the database owner inside of that master. But that's the only place I think you have to really worry about the whole SID syncing and repeating the same login is when you initially set up the database with the database owner.
But you needed to do all this because you were manually creating the database on the secondary nodes to do a join only into the contained availability group. If you were on your primary and told it to add a database through automatic seeding, if you're connected to the contained AG listener and told it to add a database to that contained AG with automatic seeding, then you wouldn't necessarily have to do all that? Because wouldn't it create the database in the contained AG on the secondaries?
So if I understand your question correctly, you're asking if I were to essentially run those scripts while I was connected to the contained AG to join those databases, then I wouldn't have to, mess with this. I haven't tried it, but I don't think I can do any AG manipulation or anything when I'm connected to the contained AG listener. I think you have to do those operations when you're connected to the instance.
To add the database to the availability group, do it when connected to the contained. That's what I was thinking. If you were connected to contained and use automatic seeding.
Yeah, but even with automatic seeding, I think you still have the issue where if I were to, if I didn't do the manual seeding, I think the only difference is that we would end up with the databases owned by the SQL Server Service account on the secondary nodes instead of. And if I didn't want that, I would change the database owner to a separate account, just like I did there. But yeah, you have to be mindful of the restrictions of, and I haven't actually done the query, but I bet you money if I select from sys availability groups, when I'm connected to the availability group listener, I'm not going to see any availability groups. It's going to be an empty master database, essentially, with that stuff, is my supposition. I haven't actually tried it, though. I guess I could real quick. Now you got me curious. I got to double check.
I see the benefit as far as the logins and the jobs. I have hundreds of jobs, and every time I create a job, primary, I have to create it on the secondary.
Yes, if you use SQL Server Agent jobs heavily, that's a big deal right there. I mean, I'll tell you, because and again, especially if you have a large estate, I think you only have a few databases in your a dozen databases or so instances, if I'm not mistaken, Julie.
Yeah, I only have 2 nodes in the one that I support. But yeah, if I had 3 nodes or more, where I'm having to always remember to create the logins and create the jobs. It's not difficult for me to manage, but it's difficult for some people backing me up when I'm on vacation.
Okay, so I'm just curious, if I could. So this guy's a sysadmin role member. I think I left everything stood up. So let me see if I try to do this. Oh, make a liar out of me. I can see the availability group at the instance level there.
That's because you're sysadmin.
That's weird. I'm gonna have to read up on that, because I didn't expect to be able to see that, because let's see, I did connect to the AG here. I just want to make sure I did that right. Yeah. Ah. Ah, man. I got my. Ah. Yeah, I thought I had tried this. Let's see. I haven't tried this from the contained availability group. Yeah. Login failed for that one. What? I'm going way off the menu here, but I gotta know now.
Dan, can you just reveal your secret password to the whole world?
I did, and that's why I'm gonna have to change it immediately after the demo. I'm gonna have to change my secret password here. Yeah, I just want to try to create that database here. Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, so I can't create databases. Yeah, so Julie, just confirm. So, so you can't really do a whole lot when you're connected to AG Listener, like create databases and do those kind of things. But what I don't understand is why you can see the availability group, DMV contents inside of the, when I'm connected to the listener connection. That kind of surprised me. I never tried to do it before, but I didn't expect to see that. And I mean, I could seeing maybe just the availability group, for the contained one. But in this case here, I also saw a non-contained availability group too. So I was kind of surprised to see that. Yeah, because this is like that SSIS one is not contained. It's just kind of, it's kind of weird. Learn something new every day.
Is it because the accounts in SA on instance?
Well, that's part of it in terms of, I don't remember the data visibility for sys availability group specifically. But I think even, I don't know. Yeah, but the SA is not honored outside of the, for that SQL account, it's not honored outside of the availability group context. So that's why I'm a little bit perplexed on it too. You know what I'm saying? Because that account cannot authenticate outside of the contained availability group. So I don't know how it could see the other stuff. So I don't know. Maybe I need to report this to Microsoft. Not sure. I have to still do some learning here.
Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.